Okay, so you're here because you want to get a really in-depth understanding of men's hairstyles
Yeah.
and specifically the pompadour.
That's right.
So we're going to take all the information that you gave us and try to pull out all the most fascinating and crucial details about this iconic look.
Exactly. We're going to do a deep dive into all things pompadour. We're going to explore the history of the pompadour, how it's evolved, the different styles you can find, and what it takes to actually keep one looking its best.
Now, I think it's pretty interesting that the origin story of the pompadour has a little bit of a twist to it.
Oh, yeah.
The pompadour wasn't originally a men's hairstyle at all.
Is that right?
Yeah, you might be surprised to learn that it actually gets its name from Madame de Pompadour, who was this really influential woman in the 18th century French court.
Interesting.
And back then, it was very fashionable for women to sweep their hair up and back, like often high above the forehead and sometimes even around the sides and back.
So how did this style that was associated with women become a go-to style for men?
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think about how this style from the French aristocracy ended up becoming part of like the male grooming world.
Right?
But our sources really point to a pretty specific moment when this whole transformation took place. Like we're talking about the emergence of a cultural phenomena.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, I'm talking about Elvis Presley. In the 1950s, he took the pompadour and he just made it his own.
Yeah, he did.
You know, he wore it smooth, dark, and let's be honest, with a lot of product to get that like super slick look.
That's right. Lots of pomade.
And all of a sudden, this hairstyle that had been associated with women, you know, for centuries at this point, became a powerful symbol of masculinity in pop culture. It's really interesting to think about how a single person can just completely change the way we see something like a hairstyle.
It's amazing, isn't it? It just goes to show you how much influence one person can have. And they can really disrupt those established norms and redefine what's considered masculine or feminine.
Absolutely. Even as something as simple as a hairstyle.
Yeah. And Elvis wasn't the last one to popularize the pompadour. The pompadour didn't stop there, did it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
The pompadour's journey definitely didn't stop with Elvis. The pompadour has shown that it's pretty resilient because in the 1970s, you know, youth culture kind of made a hard turn toward longer hair. It was all about, like, you know, rebelling against societal expectations and gender roles.
Yeah, the 70s were a really interesting time. It was kind of like a visual representation of all the social and political stuff that was going on, and the longer hairstyles were a big part of that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the pompadour took a little bit of a back seat during that time.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't completely disappear, but it definitely wasn't the most popular style.
It was kind of like it went underground for a while, waiting for the right time to come back.
Exactly. And then the 1980s rolled around and the psychobilly subculture came along and they brought the pompadour back with a vengeance. But this time it was different. You know, they kind of twisted it into something new and edgy.
Yeah, the psycho quiff.
The psycho quiff. Imagine a pompadour with a way more exaggerated height in the front, often combined with shaved sides. So it's like a pompadour and a mohawk had a baby.
It was wild. It was like they took this classic hairstyle and gave it a shot of adrenaline.
I love that analogy.
It's really cool how subcultures can take something that already exists and make it their own, and they give it a new meaning and a totally different energy. And that's exactly what happened with the pompadour in the 80s.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the pompadour story continues into more modern times as well. You know, even in the 2000s and the 2010s, the pompadour has been a popular request in barbershops. I feel like it has this staying power that a lot of other styles just don't have.
For sure. I mean, think about all the modern music icons who have embraced this style. Alex Turner from the Arctic Monkeys, Morrissey, Bruno Mars. I mean, they all have their own unique spin on this classic look, and it just shows how versatile the pompadour can be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that actually leads perfectly into the different types of pompadours that you might see today.
Okay, so if you're thinking about getting a pompadour or you're just curious about the different looks that are out there, let's break it down into three main styles that our sources gave us.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the first style is the classic pompadour.
The OG pompadour.
Yeah, basically. This one really gives you that, like, timeless golden age feel. It's the quintessential retro look. You know, if you want to channel your inner Elvis, this is the way to go.
Yeah, and just like back in Elvis's day, achieving that perfect shape and volume, you know, it takes time and effort. We're talking anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes of styling.
Wow, that's commitment.
It is. This is not a hairstyle that you can just roll out of bed and have it look amazing.
So what's the actual haircut like for a classic pompadour?
So the hair is left longer on top, with the fringe being the longest part. The back and sides are cut noticeably shorter, and usually with a combination of clippers and fizzers to get that gradual transition in length. The key things you're looking for in a classic pompadour are fullness on top and that high gloss shine.
Yeah, you want that slick back look.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about that classic 1950s aesthetic. But now let's move on to a style that's a little bit more modern. The short pompadour.
Okay, so what makes the short pompadour different?
So the short pompadour is really all about contrast. There's a much bigger difference in length between the longer hair on top and the shorter sides and back.
Right, so it's still a pompadour, but it's just a little bit more toned down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's much more reliant on clippers for the sides and back, often using a grade 4 clipper setting or even shorter to get that really uniform and tight look around the edges.
And then there's the fade pompadour, which is like a variation of the short pompadour.
Yeah, the fade pompadour is super popular.
It is. And it's really cool because the hair starts super short at the hairline, and then it gradually gets longer as you go up towards the crown. It just adds a whole other dimension to the look.
Yeah, definitely. And the biggest advantage of the short pompadour is that it's just way more practical than the classic pompadour. You know, you don't need to spend as much time styling the sides and back in the morning. So if you like the look of a pompadour but you're short on time, this might be the perfect option for you.
I can see why that would be appealing to a lot of guys.
Totally.
Yeah.
But then there's another variation that's really cool if you like a more natural and less structured look, the textured pompadour.
Ah, the textured pompadour. So this one is less about being perfectly coiffed and more about having a little bit of that effortless, cool vibe.
Precisely. It's all about incorporating layers into the haircut.
Right.
Those layers create volume separation and definition. And it's less about having that smooth wave of hair and more about like a piecey finish.
And the cool thing about this style is that your natural hair texture plays a huge role. If you've got wavy hair, you're in luck because it's usually a lot easier to get that textured pompadour look.
Right. But don't worry if you have straight hair. You can still rock a textured pompadour. You just might have to put in a little bit more work and use the right styling products to get the texture you're going for.
Yeah, the sources mention a couple of key products that are really helpful for this style.
Yeah, definitely. A good quality sea salt spray is awesome for adding grit and texture, and a hair spritz is a great option for giving wavy or textured hair some hold without making it stiff.
Makes sense. Those are good tips. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here, but I'm sure our listeners might have a few questions about the pompadour.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to go over some of those frequently asked questions that came up in the research, just to make sure we cover all our bases.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's do it. All right, so first question. Where does the term pompadour actually come from?
So we talked about this earlier, but just to recap, the pompadour hairstyle is actually named after Madame de Pompadour, who was a very influential figure in the 18th century French court. And it's interesting because the hairstyle was initially associated with women's fashion.
Okay, and who are some of the big names who really helped bring the pompadour into the spotlight as a men's hairstyle?
Well, Elvis Presley is definitely the most iconic figure associated with the pompadour, but it's also important to remember that guys like Alex Turner Morrissey and Bruno Mars have all kept the style relevant and introduced it to newer generations.
For sure. So let's talk hair types. Is the pompadour a pretty versatile style that can work for anyone?
You know, it is pretty adaptable, but guys with straight hair might need to put in a little extra work to get that volume and hold. And naturally wavy or textured hair is often perfect for the pompadour, especially the textured style.
And we mentioned earlier how much time it takes to style a classic pompadour, but just to reiterate, how long should someone expect to spend on that?
Yeah, so a classic pompadour can take anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes to style. It takes some effort to get that polished and voluminous look.
All right, and last question. Can you remind us of the recommended products for the textured and wavy pompadour styles?
Absolutely. So for a textured pompadour, sea salt spray is your best friend. It'll help enhance your natural texture and give you some volume. And if you have wavy or textured hair, a hair spritz is a great option for adding hold without weighing your hair down.
So there you have it, folks, the pompadour.
Yeah.
From its humble beginnings as a women's hairstyle in 18th century France to its status as an icon of rock and roll and all its different variations today. It's a hairstyle with an incredibly rich history, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
It's really fascinating to see how it's evolved over time and how it's managed to adapt to different fashion trends, different musical styles, and even our changing ideas about gender. It's a true classic.
It really is. And for you, our listener, we've taken you on this journey from the French court to the birth of rock and roll. We've uncovered the surprising origins of the pompadour. We've traced its evolution through all these cultural shifts and subcultures, and we've broken down the key differences between the classic short and textured styles. And of course, we've shared some essential styling tips and product recommendations.
This deep dive into the pompadour really shows us how something as simple as a hairstyle can be loaded with cultural history and how it can reflect trends in fashion, music, and even social norms.
And to wrap things up, here's something to think about. How can a hairstyle like the pompadour reflect these big cultural shifts, allow for so much individual expression, and even connect us to historical figures? What other things in our lives that we might take for granted have this kind of dynamic and evolving story? Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.